Hello and welcome to today's webcast, Host Profitability and Managing SPLA Licensing, brought to you by your Insight Microsoft Commercial team. I am Claire Folger, your CSP Marketing Coordinator at Insight, and I will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. The webcast console you are looking at can be completely customized. You can resize or move any of the windows that you have open. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. All questions from this webcast will be captured, and there will be a Q&A during the last few minutes of the presentation. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. I would now like to turn it over to our presenters for this presentation, Brandon Suaro and Brett LaForge. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's session. As Claire mentioned, my name is Brandon Suhargo. I am a SPLA Services Specialist here at Insight. Today's topic is going to be for Meet the Experts is Host Profitability and Managing SPLA Licensing. All of you invited are active SPLA clients of Insight. As most of you know, you are already entitled to help from our SPLA support team for things like onboarding assistance, license reviews, and phone and email support. In addition to those resources, we are always looking for more ways to support you as a service provider, so today's session is an extension of that effort. An overview of how you can leverage our relationship with our globally recognized partner, Octopus Cloud, to better your bottom line. With that, today is the team. Here is the team for today's presentation. From Insight, myself and Joe Miller, our services BDM specializing in SQL. And from Octopus Cloud, our main presenter will be Brett LaForge, Director of Marketing and the founder of the two licensing websites listed here, as well as Yuri Lau, Senior Sales Manager, who will be on hand as an additional resource for questions. Brett, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Pleasure to meet with you guys today to talk about the wonderful world of SPLA licensing. But it's, as Brandon alluded to, it's even more than that. It's really how do you become profitable within hosting environments. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about, well, who is Octopus, what we do, why we're here. I believe that, in order to talk about what's going to happen within the world of SPLA, I think it's really important to take a step back and see where we were in the past and the present as it relates to that program. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And finally, we're going to talk about service providers in Azure or the public cloud in general. Like, are you ready? Are you prepared to move to a public cloud environment? Or is becoming, staying on premise a better option for you? And then at the end of this, hopefully we'll have some time for some Q&A. And again, if you have any questions related to this topic, please email sam@insight.com. So who in the world is Octopus? Well, just to provide you a little historical perspective, we were founded in 2014 by two ex-Microsoft employees. We're global. We're in offices in Switzerland, Germany, all over Europe, more or less, Netherlands, United States. What we're really known for, though, is our multi-tenant scanner solution. We started off as a solution to automate SPLA reporting and compliancy, but we have evolved from there, and we'll go through that in a little bit. As far as the customer base, we're about 1,400, probably more now, service providers such as yourselves that are using this solution. And it's growing 50% annually. So you can see there's a lot of complexities within this world. So why we're unique and really, who is Octopus Cloud? Well, as I alluded to, I think we can all agree that licensing is complex. And it's especially complex for service providers or more specifically hosting companies. Because not only do you have to manage your internal licensing for your own internal employees, but you have to track all the licensing through SPLA if you're providing this solution out as a service. Or if you decide to use or are currently using public cloud, you have to manage the consumption and what happens there. And then on top of it, let's say your end customers want to leverage their own licensing through your own data center through things like license mobility. So what Octopus does, in short, is to help manage, track, even optimize these different data center scenarios. I like to define ourselves as a business intelligence platform to track everything within that data center environment. So using our tool, right, and alongside our partner Insight from a more consultative approach, it's a more comprehensive solution. So I would say, as this slide indicates, we are very specialized in that service provider space, that multi-tenant environment. For solutions like Snow or maybe Flexera, they're more designed for that on-premise solution, where we're more designed for that private cloud, public cloud, multi-tenant shared environments. And because of that, our delivery is a little bit unique as well. It's more of a phased approach. To really help understand what is deployed versus what is reported. So eliminate risk before it becomes a risk from a compliancy side, but use that to track and reduce some of your licensing exposure. And because of this, on the right-hand slide, section of this slide, we are accredited with accounting firms such as KPMG, as well as Microsoft. So long story short, we're a trusted partner, have been in this industry for many years, and we're really specialized in public cloud and private cloud scenarios. And again, to take a step back, why SPLA? Where were we? Where were we in the past, and where are we going? And I think that'll help define Octopus's transformation as well. And if you look at this slide, the history of SPLA from left to right. When I first started in this industry, the late 90s, kind of aging myself a little bit, there was that whole ASP model. And Microsoft tried to think of a way to offer licensing, as a subscription for companies that want to host or deliver software as a service. And that's transitioned into more of that current day SPLA model. It's hard to believe that SPLA has been around, since early 2000s. Continues to grow, continues to evolve as we talked about the different licensing scenarios, but it still continues to today. But as you can see, as you start to move, from left to right, in 2010, Microsoft announced Azure, and there was a lot of confusion over that, and there still is today. But what was even more confusing was the acronym BPOS. I'm not sure how many of you remember BPOS, but it stood for the Business Productivity Online Suite, which is kind of the current day Office 365 or Microsoft 365. And then license mobility. So now we're starting to get into the end customer licensing. And Microsoft decided, well, it's not confusing enough. Let's add core licensing to the mix. And now present day 2018 and beyond, there's dedicated environments. There's qualified multi-tenant hosting, which allows an end customer to transfer their Office 365 licenses into your data center. So as you can see, as you look at this from a historical perspective, that subscription-based model is really taken a hold on the industry. But I would also say that the licensing isn't getting any easier, as I thought it would. I thought when Microsoft started offering BPOS, it's a subscription model, how easy is that? But it certainly transitioned into on-premise licensing, to private cloud, to public cloud, a mixture of both. And just as this slide indicates, it is becoming a little bit a more complex environment. And because of that, I manage SPLA now, as I mentioned, since I almost said since the beginning of time, but really since SPLA came to fruition. And these SPLA reporting issues continue to this day. And I'm sure most of you who are on this call probably can relate to some of these. Like, I've done a lot of SPLA audit consultations, and 9 times out of 10, what happens is, the service provider may have 1 to 2 people responsible for the SPLA reporting. An engineer would send a report to the office manager. The office manager then would submit it to the reseller. But what we found is, okay, well, what happens if the engineer leaves or that office manager leaves? what happens to the SPLA reporting? Well, nothing is being reported, and therefore you're out of compliance. But I also think a big mistake service providers make is they look at SPLA reporting as just as a requirement by Microsoft, like we have to do this. But I would argue that it needs to be intelligence into what is happening inside your data center. And just to provide a quick example, like if you're mislicensing SQL, and you go through an audit, well, you're going to be on the hook for SQL licensing. But that also tells me you're not charging your end customers for SQL as well, which therefore you're not, you're losing profitability per end customer in that scenario, which happens all the time because SQL is a very complicated product to license. There also needs to be a baseline to understand what workloads are even relevant to move to the cloud. So when we start talking about profitability, is it more profitable to move these workloads to the cloud, or is it more profitable to stay on premise? But if you don't know what's actually installed inside your data center, well, how can you answer that question? And I think that also ties into point number 3 here. It just needs to be accurate. Like if you're reporting $1,000 a month or $100,000 a month in Microsoft licensing, my question to you is, well, don't you want to make sure it's right? So having said all of that, what does the future of SPLA look like? Well, I think confusion. As we look at it from a historical perspective, again, it's not getting any easier. But I would say, Microsoft could make it similar to like an enterprise agreement, could stay status quo. And I'm talking more specifically to a contractual perspective here. Maybe they'll make it more as an upfront commitment versus subscription. I don't know, but the point of it is, it's not getting any easier. And the biggest problem that Microsoft sees with SPLA, again, it continues to grow. They look at it as a differentiator. Like if you look at AWS and Google, they're a public cloud option only, where Microsoft has, public cloud, Azure, CSP, private cloud, SPLA, or on-premise. But their biggest problem is the reporting per end customer. Like they know, as an example, that when you report your SPLA usage and you report Exchange, that's great, but they don't understand why you're reporting Exchange, why that end customer is reporting Exchange through you as opposed to using Office 365. And that's a big problem for Microsoft. I think the other issue is, I could see an increase in software assurance benefits, an uptick, obviously, with that hybrid benefit. We talked a little bit about, mixed cloud environments. I can see that with Windows servers specifically. SPLA audits, SPLA audits have always been around. I could see that increasing globally, and again, conducted by the big 4 accounting firms. But that's one of the reasons why a trusted partner like Octopus, who's accredited with these accounting firms, is really a good solution if you're worried about an audit. And again, push for hybrid cloud and expansion of global marketplaces. And I think Insight does a really good job with their global marketplace to help you navigate these treacherous waters called Microsoft licensing. So service providers in Azure. Friend or foe, right? But I think before you even decide to move to a public cloud, such as Azure and maybe even AWS or Google, our belief is to really understand what is happening within your own data center and help service providers understand what workloads can even go to the public cloud. And so our goal, our aim is to really be your trusted advisor alongside with Insight. And our goal, I would say, and your goal, if you through this engagement, would be obviously to maximize your revenue. Well, how do you maximize your revenue? Is it if you don't know what's installed in your data center? And I guess the big question that needs to be answered is it more profitable for you moving to the cloud, or is it more profitable to use your own data center, or even an outsourcer? And by going through our methodology, you could gain insight. Understand your end customers. What workloads can even move to the cloud? And ultimately, we want to improve your performance. And I'm not talking about from a hardware perspective or anything like that. I'm really talking about a business performance. from an operations perspective, is it easier to move workloads to the public cloud, or is it easier to move to a private cloud or using an outsourcer like I mentioned? So that's our goal, is to really maximize that customer relationship. So to do that, what Octopus and Insight offers as our mutual partner is, in the hosting space, is really a three-phase approach. One, and I think you can kind of bundle these in all together. One is a cost analysis assessment. Like, we have to take inventory, right? Like, I understand most service providers, before they get audited, and I had a guy tell me the other day, I'm 100% compliant. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I've been doing this for many years. No one is 100% compliant, and Microsoft will even admit no one is 100% compliant, just because of the complexity of the licensing as well as the complexity of end customer licensing. So our goal is to really take an inventory, right, using our tool to understand what's actually installed and do a profitability analysis alongside that. So we're taking that raw data and translating that into a usage report. So we can, paint a picture of, okay, here's what's actually installed versus what's reported. And it gives us that phase two, which is more of a viability assessment. And I think here, we look at more than just licensing. We'll look at the infrastructure. Like, if you just bought hardware for your customer, well, the odds are you're not going to migrate, whatever workloads are on that piece of hardware to a public cloud. But maybe there's an older piece of equipment in there that may make sense to move to a public cloud. I also think it's important to look at end customers and understand what contracts are in place with your end customers. Like, if one of your sellers signed a customer up yesterday for a private cloud solution hosted out of your own data center, and the price reflects that, well, the odds are you're not going to move that customer during the term of that agreement. So let's take a look at even what workloads can even move. And then from there, we could say, okay, well, let's look at the VM sizes, what you're running now, and do an Azure cost calculation. Or a profitability, more importantly, a profitability calculation. And here's where Insight, through their consultative approach, can really help you. And at the end of this, it's more around profitability, right? Like, is it going to be more profitable for you? Let's do a cost comparison. Is there an upsell, cross-sell opportunity? What does the end customer lifecycle look like? But let's plan for the future. So as you're going through this process, and again, I mentioned, what's going to happen in the future of SPLA. Well, what's going to happen within your own data centers in the future? What are your plans as an organization? And I think that's all part of this. So what Octopus does is, again, we're more than just a tool. The tool, everybody used to talk about a tool, and the reality is there's no magic wand to Microsoft licensing. Well, what it does is provides you insight, comparing against what's installed versus what's reported, and give you that risk assessment. Let's eliminate risk before it becomes a risk, as I always like to say. And then from there, let's build a strategy to help you with your cloud customer roadmap. And I hope that makes sense. So I talked a lot about, the consultative approach to all this. But from an overall tool, and we're not going to do a demo of the tool today because I think it's very difficult to do on a webinar, but I would encourage, if there's some interest, if you're trying to understand what's happening inside your data center, I think it's really important to do a demo of our tool and what the platform can really do for you. Because again, I think no two service providers are the same. And I think it's important to really understand what's happening for your unique scenario. Now, a lot of service providers have the same pain point. You mentioned SQL Server, and usually there's a SI that comes after that. But I also think that everybody has their own unique offering. And so the key components of our solution is really around, and I think you can kind of bundle some of these in together, such as a scanner, which goes on and scans the environment. And this could be agent or agentless, depending on your environment. The actual data that's collected through this scan can be hosted in the cloud, or it could be on-premise. I would say 90% of our customers probably want that on-premise. And then our intelligence behind this. So this is where we're really unique versus some of the other SAM players out there. Is our intelligence takes the product use rights and optimizes that raw data. It says, okay, well, here's what you're reporting now. Here's what's actually installed. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're reporting Windows Standard as an example. But yet you're running more than 6 or 7 VMs on that host. Well, our intelligence will say, hey, Mr. SPLA customer, maybe you should take a look at Windows Data Center. And this is the most optimized way you can license this specific server environment. And so all that then spits out a report. And it's a dashboard that shows, you could say pane of glass, and I hate using that term, but it's a pane of glass of everything that we've collected. And you can automate this to be reported to your reseller through APIs, or it could be extracted for any specific person within your organization. And it gives you a paper trail. Because I will say one of the biggest issues in audits is there's no paper trail to anything. And so service providers are kind of scrambling when they go through an audit. Because one of the things with an audit is you have to prove the way you're licensing. So you can't just say, oh, this is a licensed mobility customer. The auditor's going to say, okay, that's fine, prove it. Well, through our technology, you're able to say, okay, well, these customers have software assurance. These customers have contracts that expire such and such date. And so it gives you a lot great information as far as reporting. And I think that's what's really differentiates us is we call it a SPLA manager, but I would argue it's a SPLA intelligence tool. And use that data not just for audit purposes, but use that data to understand how you should be charging your customers. And again, going back to my example with SQL, it happened the other day. A guy was reporting SQL Web for the longest time, but he actually had SQL Enterprise installed, and he was going through an audit. Well, Microsoft is charging that customer, that service provider, for SQL Enterprise. And as we all know, SQL Enterprise is a lot more expensive than SQL Web. And so not only is this customer having to pay for SQL Enterprise, again, to my example earlier, he's not charging his customer for SQL Enterprise. And he's losing out on a lot of profitability. Because at the end of the day, does the end customer even need SQL Enterprise? So don't just install something without knowing, who has access to it, what features are they using within that application. And again, that's the intelligence that Octopus Cloud can help with. So I think, to summarize all of this, the benefit for the service providers, and I kind of touched on this a lot, was, again, it's more consultative than a lot of just using a tool. The tool is going to give you the information of what's installed, but it's really aligning your cloud and business strategy to meet your needs. What is the most optimal mix of your infrastructure? Is it Azure? Is it on-premise? What are the potential, roadblocks to any of this? And ultimately, it's build a cost comparison of all these different solutions. Because as I mentioned, that historical slide deck, it's not getting any easier. I thought it would. It's not. As a matter of fact, it's just getting a lot more complex. And I think you need to work with a trusted advisor like Insight, who knows the licensing, has been doing this for many years, but you leverage Octopus Cloud as a tooling solution to help you identify where these gaps actually lie. So I kind of touched on this, right? I think a lot of it is just to give you the complete visibility, complete understanding of what's happening in the data center, how you can become more efficient, manage risk and compliancy, which is all importance. And I would say, and I think this number is actually small, when I say non-compliant risk of audit fines, 30% shortfall on average, that's a 30% unbudgeted expense for service providers. And as you know, licensing is not getting cheap, it's getting more depending on the scenario, it's becoming more expensive. And the last thing you need to have is a shortfall for some of these licenses. And I think ultimately what's summarized, it's all about cost management. And for me, it's, you don't want to overpay Microsoft. Sometimes I look at Microsoft like the IRS. You don't want to pay them any more money than you have to. So let's really understand, what software users have access to, either directly or indirectly. And from there, let's remove some of that software and users that are not using the software. And then ultimately, let's see a way to optimize some of your licensing costs. And at the end of this, what is the data center migration path? I think that's where Insight can really help you as well, is helping you with the migration of all these workloads, which I think is also important.
Okay, thanks for all that, Brett. All right, folks, keeping in mind everything we've gone over so far, the question is, of course, what's next? Well, in addition to your questions, which we will address after this slide, you can schedule a free 30-minute review session with our specialists to address your unique needs and questions one-on-one. As highlighted here, potential topics include an Octopus Cloud tool strategy session, learning how the intelligence can help your business, SAM for SPLA or SPLA audit risks, identifying the risks before they become risks, optimizing your monthly SPLA reporting, 6 optimization strategies, and etc. You can contact us at sam@insight.com. That is, again, SAM, sam@insight.com. And now we can move on to any remaining questions.
Morning. Looks like we got a bunch of great questions out there. Let's start with, how does the scanner report back? And you might have answered some of these, but if you could reiterate, that'd be great.
All right, Yuri, you want to take that?
Yuri?
Yeah, maybe repeat the question there. I was trying to get a hold of Yuri.
Sure. It's, how does the scanner report back? And there's a couple of follow-up questions to that. Essentially, I know that it's agent and agentless, and there was a follow-up question how are you able to access the data without agents? So.
Well, there was one answer here in terms of the API for reporting question from Yuri. It says, let's see. In regards to the API question, there is a RESTful API available in OC Cloud View. But there's a possibility to receive the reporting per email on a monthly basis by setting up email addresses, which doesn't need any API to be set up.
And that was a question, but is there additional information in regards to the access of the ability to get the information? How does the scanner report back?
Yeah, Yuri, can you take that?
We appear to be having technical difficulties with Yuri.
Okay. Brett, can you maybe talk at a high level about that? Or I know there's 2 options. One is agent-based and one is agentless.
I mean, it really depends on the environment in which, some solutions, even some environments, you can collect it a lot easier using an agent. But agentless is really good for larger environments. So it really just depends.
And is it just standard?
Go ahead.
Good. I was going to say standard protocols, SNMP, WMI, that type of thing, or?
You got it. Yep.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Let me move on. Looks like one of the big concerns is that the SPLA owners have no idea what Microsoft sees in their environment, and if there is a server on the infrastructure that should have been decommissioned and human error occurs, they might not realize it. and it might be misreported. So Microsoft needs to kind of tell them what they see so that they don't wait for an audit to correct it. So I guess that's more of a statement than a question. Is there something that we can address that can better explain what they see? I mean, that's kind of the whole point of this solution, right?
Right. Yuri, you can't join.
He's answering some questions in the team chat. If you can read those off.
Okay.
Because he's having audio difficulties.
All right. All right. So, okay, you talked about the scanner reports back to Octopus Cloud View. OC scanners can consist of different PowerShell scripts to scan different IT layers. Okay, so that was a response to the other question that we had. Yuri, if you could type in the last question, I guess that, like we just said, that's kind of the point of this whole solution is we're going to give the service providers a better view of their infrastructure so that they would know in advance what Microsoft is seeing. That's correct, isn't it, Brett?
Yes, yeah, that is correct.
Okay, so all right, we talked about agents and agentless. What type of additional traffic and/or resources are utilized to support this effort, both technology and human resources?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why we partnered together. Because from a resource perspective, again, it's more than just the tool. It's taking that data and transforming that into a usage report, and the intelligence will work behind it. But it's really working with you, the service provider, as a business consultation to really understand, again, what workloads you can move to the cloud, what workloads are you considering moving to the cloud, and provide a clear roadmap for that progression.
Great. Quick question here. Does the scanner tool work in KVM environments? That might be a Yuri answer. If and when he replies, if you can just state what he says, Brandon, I'll move on to another question. Can you, Brett, maybe share examples in growth opportunities that have led to increased profitability?
Oh, I'm sorry, Joe, you cut out there.
Certainly. Could you share an example of a discovered growth opportunity that have led to increased profitability through discovery from the tool?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of examples of that. I mean, you can look at it even in the most simple form, from a licensing side. Customers who were reporting Office Pro Plus as an example. But yet the end customer is only using the features of Excel. Well, instead of licensing Office Pro Plus, which is a lot more expensive, maybe the service provider can just get away with just licensing the single SKU of Excel, which is again a lot cheaper. So that, in a simple way, that works. The other way is, if you look at, I provided this example even through the webcast, is just look at virtualization. Is it more profitable using Windows Data Center versus Windows Standard? Taking a look at the environment, instead of just reporting the same thing month over month, what are some ways that users have access to? What are they using on a month-to-month basis? The other thing the tool shows is, which users are no longer active. And I think that's important as well, because some of these customers, I'm talking about the end customers, may leave the company, but yet the service providers are still reporting them Exchange as an example. And I think that's a challenge, but also if we can remove some of those licenses, again, it could be more profitable for the service provider.
Gotcha. And if I recall too, just being able to categorize the different assets in the environment as well too, to see what is something that they have to declare, right?
Right.
Okay. What are the biggest strains that are discovered through monitoring? So I guess you kind of answered that somewhat, but can you maybe readdress that?
The strains?
Yeah, I guess that's on the profitability side, right? I mean, so what are people seeing as a decreased help in decreasing their profitability?
Decrease the profitability? What's driving the?
Correct.
Yeah. So I mean, again, the idea here is to increase profitability, but what we're seeing from decreased profitability is let's say contractual. They know, a lot of service providers know their data center costs, and sometimes without any kind of consultation or understanding of what's in their data center, and then migrate those workloads to Azure or someone else. Maybe they don't right size the correct VM, and so there's some surprise there, which obviously can decrease profitability. But I think profitability is more than just licensing. I think it's also operationally. And I think that's part of the issue is you got to understand, is it more profitable operationally? Is there, can your engineers focus on developing software as opposed to managing SPLA reporting? And if you might, use Azure where there's, the licensing complexity is a little, not as high, or the compliance risk isn't as high because now it's in Azure as opposed to your own data center. Is that worth it to you? So again, I think it's more than just licensing. I think there's ways that companies may not have a full understanding, a full grasp of what's happening in the data center, and move certain workloads without maybe some sort of consultation or really a full understanding of the environment itself.
Gotcha.
We have a couple of questions here that are being answered by Yuri right now. From earlier, does your scanner tool work in KVM environments? The answer is yes. Can the tool see inside vCenter and detect Windows VMs? Again, yes. And additional detail for an earlier question, how does the scanner report back the IP of the host it finds? The OC scanner can be deployed with agents, agentless, or a combination of both. The OC scanner consists of different PowerShell scripts which scan the different IT layers, such as the virtualization layer, vCenter, MS Hyper-V, Active Directory domains, and desktop applications.
Very cool. Okay, I guess there's one more question here. How long do the recommended changes take for an impact to the business, and what strides do they see as far as profitability?
Yeah, again, no two service providers are the same. It could be, larger environments are a little more complex. But I will say in a typical engagement, we start seeing the results within 3 weeks. It's just a matter of the time it takes, to get the service provider fully on board, to actually deploy the tool. How much are we scanning? Because I think another big mistake is service providers only take a certain percentage of their environment. So we'll just scan 10% of the environment, but in actuality, that only provides us 10% of the details. And by scanning your entire environment, now we have a bigger picture. So it really depends on the scenario. But I will say, in 9 times out of 10, within the first 3 weeks, we'll have an understanding of what's installed. And then from there, okay, well, here's what's installed, but now let's take a look at what we can do to reduce some of the licensing gaps. So again, our approach, along with Insights, is a lot more proactive, because I think SPLA, by its nature, has always been reactive. Especially SPLA audits, we report the same month over month, and all of a sudden we get audited. Now we're going back and correcting everything. Well, I think when we mention, let's eliminate risk before it becomes a risk, I think the goal is, from all of this, is to be a lot more proactive in our analysis and not make SPLA such a transaction, just a transactional relationship. it's great that you can report your SPLA usage and you're reporting on time to Insight. Insight is submitting it to Microsoft, and that's all well and good. But if what you're reporting isn't accurate, then that tells me, again, to my point earlier, if you're reporting $1,000 a month or $100,000 a month, it tells me is you got to make sure it's right. And I think, going back to your original question, Joe, around, how long does it take and things like that. Again, I think a lot of it has to do with how much are we scanning and how much are you invested in as a service provider to make sure that it's correct. Because again, the tool will do one thing. It'll collect the usage, and we're using, the intelligence behind it to make sure you're optimized and all of that. But really the goal of all this is to be proactive and make sure that we have a business case. We start building a model for what does the future look like? Because again, going back to the future of SPLA, bullet point 1, it was complexity, right? So I think for us and for you, it's a true partnership, and it's a lot, again, using proactive approach instead of the reactive. So I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Very common theme in technology, adoption and commitment, right?
That's right.
So here's another question. Can this tool also detect if one of their customers deploys a Windows server using a cracked or stolen key?
I don't know, Yuri, does it go into the actual keys? That I don't know. Can you type that in?
It looks like he's in the process of typing out an answer.
Right, guys.
You
can hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thanks. Great. So yes, if the hoster has access to the end client environment to scan their environment, we can track the Windows server. But the keys, that's something I think we cannot scan. Or if somehow that is stored in their environment somewhere, there might be a chance theoretically to scan that as well. But I think those kind of keys are not somehow recorded in their environment. I think any keys will not be recorded in any of those environments. So yeah, we can only scan the Windows server. That's for sure, if you have access.
And a best practice around that, whether you could scan the keys or not, anytime an end customer says they want to bring Windows Server into your data center environment, there's only one option for you, and that's to isolate the hardware for that end customer. There's no license mobility for Windows Server under SPLA. There's no hybrid use benefit under SPLA for Windows Server. And the same is true for AWS. You can't take a Windows Server over to AWS. And those same rules apply for you. So anytime a customer, and I get it, maybe a customer just installs it without you knowing. But again, I think that's where you really need to have control over your data center. And reality is, whether you agree with it or not, anything installed in your data center, you should have some idea of what's really happening. I think the other thing to this too is educating your sales team. Because I've noticed during audits, a lot of the service provider sales team will just say yes because they want the customer, right? But there are restrictions. And I think, it's very difficult for your sales rep to go back to the customer and say, hey, look, I know I told you can bring Windows Server over to our environment, but in all actuality, you can't. And so I guess to summarize, I know this doesn't answer the question specifically, but anytime there's Windows Server, just make sure it's an isolated piece of hardware. And then if it's isolated, then you'll know that, it's customer owned and so forth and so on. So, but I think, again, that around the conversation around licensing, I think that's where Insight can really help you out with as well, as understanding, what are the license mobility rights? Because, they're experts when it comes to, especially EA agreements and things like that, with software assurance benefits. It's one thing to say, license mobility, but they have to have active software assurance in order for it to apply. So,
well, that extends our questions that we have right now. I don't know if anybody else has any questions, if they want to type it in real quick, or if any of the other presenters has anything that they want to ask. Now's the time. No, nothing else? Great.
Good.
Well,
As I say, if you have questions, just reach out to Sam at insight.com. And I would say, again, going back to this slide, this is free. Obviously, Insight's here to answer your licensing questions and things like that. But I would say the next step in all of this, and I know I talked really quick for 30 minutes, but really just do a demo. And I think a lot of those questions that were left unanswered at the beginning, because I'm more of a marketing guy than anything else, is to really just dive deep and understand, what's happening, what your data center looks like, and maybe do that Octopus Cloud tool strategy session where we can actually demo this and answer a lot of those questions for you. So again, questions, just email Sam at insight.com.
Great. Thanks, you guys. Claire?
Thank you, everyone. That will conclude our webinar. We hope you have a great rest of your day.
Hey, thank you, guys.
Take care.